The community center smelled like vanilla cake and broken promises. I stood in the corner, watching my wife Iris deliver her carefully rehearsed speech about turning 40, about feeling invisible, about how marriage changes people. The crowd of friends and neighbors nodded sympathetically, their faces painted with that particular brand of pity reserved for women who claim their husbands no longer see them. "I just feel like I've become background noise," Iris continued, her voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. "Like I'm fading away, becoming someone Rick doesn't even notice anymore." Rick. That's me. Rick Hayward, 47, freelance IT consultant, and apparently the villain in my wife's carefully constructed narrative. I sipped my beer and watched her performance, noting how her eyes found Zane Merrinor in the crowd, her personal trainer. 25 years old, all muscle and swagger, standing near the refreshment table like he belonged here. The thing about being an IT guy is that you learn to see patterns. Data doesn't lie. People do, but their digital footprints tell the truth. For the past 3 months, I'd been collecting those footprints, following the trail of synced calendars, location services, and automatically backed up messages that painted a very different picture than the one Iris was selling tonight. "Marriage requires work," she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that Melanie Kramer, her best friend, had thoughtfully provided. "But it also requires attention. When that attention goes elsewhere, when you stop really seeing your partner..." I almost laughed. The irony was suffocating. Here she was, talking about being invisible while conducting a very visible affair with a man young enough to be her little brother. The community center felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in, as I realized how many people were buying this performance. Lisa Marrow, our neighbor, caught my eye from across the room and gave me a sympathetic smile. "Poor Rick," her expression seemed to say. "Such a neglectful husband." If only she knew that Lisa had been feeding information to Iris for months, reporting on my comings and goings like some suburban spy network. The speech ended to polite applause. Iris wiped her eyes and smiled bravely, the picture of a woman trying to make the best of a difficult situation. Dave Garrison, her boss from the marketing firm, stepped forward with a bouquet of roses. His infatuation with my wife was painfully obvious to everyone except Iris herself, who seemed to view his attention as nothing more than professional courtesy. "Time for presents," Melanie announced, clapping her hands together. The crowd gathered around the gift table, a collection of wrapped boxes and gift bags that represented the social obligations of friendship. Wine, candles, jewelry, books about self-discovery and empowerment. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small box wrapped in silver paper, simple, elegant, unremarkable. "This one's from me," I said, stepping forward. The crowd parted, and I found myself face to face with my wife. Her eyes were still slightly red from her emotional performance, but I could see the calculation behind them. She was wondering what I'd chosen, hoping it would somehow validate her narrative of neglect. She took the box with delicate fingers, as if it might contain something fragile. The room fell quiet, that particular silence that accompanies moments of anticipated sentiment. Even Zane had moved closer, though he tried to maintain the casual distance appropriate for someone who was supposedly just her fitness trainer. Iris unwrapped the box slowly, savoring the attention. She lifted the lid and looked inside. Her face went through a series of expressions so quickly that most people probably missed the transition. Confusion, recognition, horror. The color drained from her cheeks like water from a broken dam. Inside the box were photographs, printed on high-quality paper, time-stamped and dated. Iris and Zane at the Riverside Hotel. Iris and Zane in the parking lot behind the fitness center. Iris and Zane at the lakeside cabin she'd rented for what she told me was a personal retreat weekend. The silence stretched longer. Someone coughed. A chair scraped against the floor. Iris stared at the photos like they might somehow transform into something else if she looked hard enough. You said I don't look at you the way I used to, I said, my voice carrying clearly in the quiet room. You're right. You said you feel invisible, but you seem very visible to him. I nodded toward Zane, whose face had gone pale. He looked like a man who'd just realized he was standing in quicksand. Iris opened her mouth, but no words came out. The carefully constructed narrative she'd built over months crumbled in the space of a heartbeat. There was no way to explain these images, no story that would transform them into something innocent. Rick, she finally whispered, this isn't... I can explain... But she couldn't explain, and we both knew it. The timestamps on the photos corresponded perfectly with her claimed training sessions, her late nights at the office, her weekend retreats for self-discovery. Every lie was documented, every deception captured in high resolution. The crowd began to murmur. I heard fragments of conversation, whispered speculation, the sound of a social circle trying to process information that didn't fit their preconceived notions. Melanie moved closer to Iris, either to offer support or to get a better look at the evidence. Dave Garrison stepped back as if he'd been slapped. His bouquet of roses suddenly looked ridiculous, a romantic gesture offered to a woman who'd been playing games he didn't even know existed. I looked around the room, meeting eyes, watching faces. These people had come here tonight expecting a celebration. They'd gotten a revelation instead. The birthday party had become something else entirely, a public reckoning disguised as a social gathering. Happy birthday, Iris, I said quietly. Then I turned and walked toward the exit, leaving my wife standing in the middle of her collapsed narrative, holding evidence of her own deception like a gift she couldn't return. Behind me, the silence finally broke. Voices erupted in a chaos of questions and exclamations. But I didn't look back. I'd spent months planning this moment, and it had gone exactly as I'd hoped. The real party was just beginning. My home office felt like a war room at 3 a.m. Multiple monitors glowed in the darkness, displaying spreadsheets, photo files, and communication logs that told the story of my marriage's dissolution in meticulous detail. Being an IT consultant has its advantages when you need to reconstruct a timeline of deception. The beauty of modern technology is that it remembers everything, even when people try to forget. Shared cloud storage, automatic backups, location services that track every movement. Iris thought she'd been careful, but careful and invisible are two different things entirely. I pulled up the calendar sync data first. Her official schedule showed training sessions with Zane 3 times a week, each lasting exactly 1 hour. But the location data from her phone told a different story. Those sessions frequently extended well beyond their scheduled times, and they often moved from the fitness center to locations that had nothing to do with exercise. The Riverside Hotel appeared 17 times in her location history over the past 3 months. Always on days when she had training sessions, always during hours when she was supposedly working on her fitness goals. Her text messages were even more revealing. The automatic backup feature she'd forgotten about had preserved everything, including the messages she thought she'd erased. Reading them felt like archaeological work, excavating the remains of trust and honesty from layers of deception. Can't wait to see you today. Rick's working late again. Iris to Zane, sent 3 weeks ago. You make me feel young again, like I'm worth something. Iris to Zane, sent last Tuesday. He doesn't suspect anything. He's too wrapped up in his computers to notice what's happening in the real world. Iris to Zane, sent yesterday morning. That last one stung more than the others. The dismissive tone, the assumption that my focus on technology somehow made me oblivious to human behavior. She'd mistaken my quiet observation for ignorance, my patience for stupidity. I compiled the evidence methodically, creating a timeline that would have impressed any prosecutor. Photos taken from public locations, using a telephoto lens I'd purchased specifically for this purpose. Hotel receipts retrieved from our shared credit card statements. Phone records that showed calls made during times when she claimed to be in meetings or training sessions. The lakeside cabin was particularly damning. She'd rented it for a weekend, telling me she needed space to think about our relationship, time to figure out what she wanted from life. The rental agreement was in our joint email account, easily accessible. What she hadn't counted on was the cabin's security camera system, which I'd hacked using credentials I'd found in their poorly secured network. The footage was crystal clear. Iris and Zane arriving together, spending the weekend in what was supposed to be her private retreat. The images left no room for alternative interpretation. My phone buzzed with a text message from Tommy Chen, my old college roommate and one of the few people who knew what I'd discovered. "How did it go tonight?" he'd written. "Better than expected," I replied. "She's probably still standing there trying to explain physics to a room full of people who just watched gravity work." Tommy had been helping me plan this revelation for weeks. He understood the importance of timing, of choosing the right moment for maximum impact. A public birthday party, surrounded by friends and colleagues, was perfect. No opportunity for private damage control, no chance to spin the story before witnesses saw the evidence. My computer chimed with an email notification. Iris, writing from her phone, probably still at the community center. "We need to talk. This isn't what you think. Please come home so we can discuss this like adults." I stared at the message for a long moment, then archived it without responding. There was nothing to discuss. The evidence spoke for itself, and I'd moved beyond the stage where explanations mattered. Another email arrived, this one from Melanie Kramer. "Rick, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Iris is devastated. Whatever those photos show, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. She loves you." I almost laughed. Melanie, ever the loyal friend, trying to control the narrative even after the truth had been revealed. But I'd done my research on Melanie too. Her own marriage had ended 2 years ago under similar circumstances, and she'd been encouraging Iris's affair from the beginning. The text messages between them were illuminating. "You deserve to be happy," Melanie had written to Iris just last week. "Rick doesn't appreciate what he has. Zane makes you glow." "I feel guilty sometimes," Iris had replied. "But you're right. I can't keep living like this." "Don't feel guilty for taking what you need," Melanie had responded. "Life's too short to waste on people who don't see your worth." I forwarded Melanie's email to my trash folder and returned to my documentation. The birthday party had been just the opening move. What came next required more careful planning. I opened a new document and began typing. Phase 2. Professional Consequences. Dave Garrison's infatuation with Iris made him a natural ally, though he didn't know it yet. His company had strict policies about workplace relationships and personal conduct. While Iris's affair wasn't technically a workplace issue, it demonstrated a pattern of deception that could reflect poorly on her professional judgment. More importantly, Dave's feelings for Iris meant he'd be personally hurt by the revelation. Hurt people make unpredictable decisions, and unpredictable decisions create opportunities. I pulled up the company directory and found Dave's email address. Then I began crafting a message that would seem like concerned disclosure rather than vindictive revelation. "Dave, I thought you should know about some personal issues that might affect Iris's work performance in the coming weeks. As someone who cares about her professional success, I felt you deserved to understand the situation." I attached a carefully selected subset of the evidence, nothing too explicit, but enough to paint a clear picture. The goal wasn't to get Iris fired, but to complicate her life in ways that would make recovery more difficult. The email went into my drafts folder. Tomorrow morning would be soon enough to send it. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call, not a text. Iris, probably desperate to control the damage. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to the message. "Rick, please, I know how this looks, but it's not what you think. Zane and it's complicated. I was confused, feeling lost. It doesn't mean anything. Our marriage means everything to me. Please call me back so we can work this out." Her voice was shaky, desperate. The confident woman who'd delivered her speech about feeling invisible had been replaced by someone who sounded genuinely invisible for the first time in years. I saved the voicemail. Evidence for later use. The clock on my computer showed 3:47 a.m. In a few hours, people would wake up and remember what they'd witnessed at the birthday party. Social media would light up with speculation and gossip. The story would spread through our social circle like a virus, mutating and evolving with each retelling. By tomorrow evening, everyone would know. Iris's carefully maintained reputation would be in ruins, and her relationship with Zane would be exposed to the kind of scrutiny that destroys most affairs. But that was just the beginning. I had weeks of planning ahead of me, months of consequences to orchestrate. Tonight had been about revelation. What came next would be about reckoning. I closed my laptop and headed upstairs to bed. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities for justice. Al's tavern smelled like stale beer and fresh secrets. I'd been coming here for 15 years, long enough to understand that Al Morrison knew everything worth knowing about everyone in town. His bar served as the unofficial information exchange for our little corner of upstate New York, and tonight I had information to trade. "Rick Hayward," Al called from behind the bar as I walked in. "Heard you threw quite a party last night." Word traveled fast. I'd expected that. In a town of 8,000 people, news like mine didn't stay contained for long. "Just gave my wife a birthday present she'll never forget," I said, sliding onto a bar stool. "Whiskey, neat." Al poured the drink with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd been listening to other people's problems for 3 decades. He was a big man, soft around the middle, with the kind of face that invited confidences. People told Al things they wouldn't tell their therapists. "Heard it was quite a present," he said, setting the glass in front of me. "Melanie Kramer was in here an hour ago, trying to convince anyone who'd listen that there was some kind of misunderstanding." "Melanie's good at convincing people of things," I said. "Convinced my wife that having an affair was some kind of empowerment." Al's eyebrows rose slightly. He'd suspected, of course. Al suspected everything, but confirmation was different from speculation. "That young trainer from the fitness center?" he asked. "Zane Merrinor, 25 years old, thinks he's God's gift to lonely housewives." "Seen him in here a few times," Al said. "Cocky little piece of work. Tips like someone who's never worked for money." I sipped my whiskey and let that comment settle. Al's observations were always worth noting. He had a talent for reading character that came from years of watching people reveal themselves over alcohol. The door opened, and Lisa Marrow walked in. Our neighbor, Iris's spy network, looking uncomfortable in a bar she'd probably never entered before. She spotted me immediately and approached with the determined stride of someone on a mission. "Rick," she said, her voice tight with forced friendliness. "I was hoping I'd find you here." "Lisa," I nodded. "Let me guess. Iris sent you to do damage control." Her face flushed slightly. "She's worried about you, about how you're handling this situation." "This situation," I repeated. "Is that what we're calling adultery now?" Al continued polishing glasses, but I could tell he was listening. Everything said in his bar became part of the town's collective memory eventually. "There might be explanations you haven't considered," Lisa continued. "Marriage is complicated. People make mistakes when they're feeling neglected." "Neglected," I said. "Interesting word choice. Tell me, Lisa, how long have you been reporting my activities to my wife?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again without producing sound. "I don't know what you mean," she finally managed. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. Hit play. Lisa's voice filled the small space around the bar. "He left for work at 8:15 this morning, took his laptop bag, so probably going to a client site, should be gone most of the day." A pause. "No, he doesn't suspect anything. He's completely oblivious." The recording was from 2 weeks ago. I'd planted a small digital recorder in my own garage after noticing Lisa's unusual interest in my schedule. The device had captured dozens of similar conversations. Lisa's face went white. "Rick, I can explain." "No need," I said. "I understand perfectly. The question is whether everyone else will understand when this recording makes its way around town." Al had stopped pretending to clean glasses. He was watching our conversation with the focused attention of someone witnessing significant drama. "What do you want?" Lisa asked quietly. "Nothing from you," I said. "You've already given me everything I needed, but I'd suggest you stop carrying messages between me and my wife. That job just became very dangerous for your reputation." Lisa left without ordering anything. Al waited until the door closed behind her before speaking. "That woman's been spreading gossip about you for months," he said. "Telling people you were cold, distant, probably having your own affair." "Was I cold and distant?" I asked. Al considered the question seriously. "You were quiet, but quiet and cold aren't the same thing. Some men just think before they talk." The door opened again, and Dave Garrison walked in. Iris's boss, looking like someone who'd had a very bad day. He spotted me immediately, but hesitated before approaching. "Buy you a drink, Dave?" I called. He walked over reluctantly, like a man approaching his own execution. "Beer," he told Al. "Whatever's cold." "Rough day at the office?" I asked. Dave took a long pull from his beer before answering. "Got some interesting information this morning. About Iris." I'd sent the email at 7 a.m., knowing Dave would see it first thing when he arrived at work. The timing was important, early enough to ruin his entire day, late enough that Iris wouldn't be there to provide immediate damage control. "Sorry you had to find out that way," I said. "Thought you deserved to know." "How long?" he asked. 3 months that I can prove. Probably longer." Dave stared into his beer like it might contain answers to questions he didn't want to ask. His infatuation with Iris had been obvious to everyone except Iris herself. She'd treated his attention as professional courtesy, never realizing that he'd been building romantic fantasies around their working relationship. "She talked about you," he said finally. "About how you didn't appreciate her, didn't see her worth. I thought maybe someday." "Yeah," I said. "She's good at making people think what she wants them to think." "The photos you sent," Dave continued, "they're real? Metadata doesn't lie. Timestamps, location data, camera information, all verifiable." Al poured himself a shot and drank it quickly. Even he seemed affected by the weight of the conversation. "What happens now?" Dave asked. "That depends," I said, "on whether you think someone who lies to their spouse might also lie to their employer." Dave's jaw tightened. "She's on probation. Effective immediately. Any more problems? Any hint that her personal issues are affecting her work? And she's gone." "Seems fair," I said. Dave finished his beer in 3 long swallows and left money on the bar. "I feel like an idiot," he said. "Don't," I replied. "She's very good at making smart people feel stupid. It's a talent." After Dave left, Al refilled my whiskey without being asked. "You're playing a dangerous game," he said. "How so?" "Destroying someone's life, even when they deserve it, changes you, makes you into something you might not like." I considered his words carefully. Al had seen a lot of human wreckage over the years. His warnings carried weight. "Maybe," I said. "But letting someone walk all over you changes you too, makes you into something they don't respect." "Fair point," Al admitted. "Just remember that revenge is like alcohol. Easy to overdo it." I finished my drink and left money on the bar. Outside, the evening air felt clean after the close atmosphere of the tavern. My phone showed 3 missed calls from Iris and 2 text messages. "Please call me. We need to talk." "I'm staying at Melanie's tonight. Don't change the locks." Too late for that. I'd changed the locks that morning, along with the security codes and the Wi-Fi password. The house was mine now, along with everything in it. My phone rang. Tommy, checking in. "How's the campaign going?" he asked. "Ahead of schedule," I said. "The gossip network is more efficient than I expected." "And how are you holding up?" It was a good question. I felt hollow in some ways, like someone had scooped out my insides and left only determination behind. But I also felt clear-headed for the first time in months. Purpose was a powerful antidote to self-doubt. "I'm fine," I said. "Better than fine." "Just remember what we talked about," Tommy said. "Know when to stop." "I'll stop when it's finished." "When is it finished?" Another good question. I wasn't sure I had an answer yet. "I'll know when I get there," I said. After hanging up, I drove home to my empty house. The silence felt peaceful rather than lonely. For the first time in months, I knew exactly where my wife was and what she was doing. The uncertainty that had been eating at me was gone, replaced by something much more useful. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities. Zane hadn't heard from me directly yet, and that conversation was overdue. The fitness center where he worked had security cameras, and I'd already identified several vulnerabilities in their system. Phase 3 was about to begin. The elite fitness center closed at 10 p.m., but Zane Merrinor always stayed late to work on his own training. I'd been watching his routine for 2 weeks, learning his patterns the same way I'd learned my wife's. Predictability was a weakness that most people never recognized in themselves. I waited in the parking lot until the last regular customer left, then used the staff entrance. The lock was electronic, controlled by a system that hadn't been updated in 3 years. Breaking the encryption took less than 5 minutes with the right software. Zane was in the weight room doing bench presses with more weight than seemed safe for someone working out alone. Vanity, probably. The need to prove something to himself after being exposed as a homewrecker. "Working late," I said, stepping into the room. He nearly dropped the barbell, managed to rack it safely, then sat up with the quick movements of someone whose nervous system had just been flooded with adrenaline. "Rick," he said, "what are you doing here?" "Thought we should talk, man to man, about boundaries." Zane stood up, and I was reminded of why women found him attractive. He was tall, well-built, with the kind of confidence that came from never having been seriously challenged. That confidence was about to be tested. "Look, about Iris," he began. "About my wife," I corrected. "Let's use proper titles." "Right. About your wife. I know how this looks, but it's not what you think." I walked over to the weight rack and selected a 45-pound plate, hefted it, feeling the balance. "What do I think, Zane?" "That we planned this. That we set out to hurt you, but it just happened. We connected, you know? She was lonely, feeling ignored." "Ignored," I repeated, still holding the weight plate. Interesting diagnosis from someone who's known her for 3 months. Zane's eyes tracked the weight in my hands. He was starting to understand that this conversation might not go the way he'd expected. "I'm not trying to make excuses," he said. "What we did was wrong. But marriages are complicated. Sometimes people find what they need in unexpected places." I nodded thoughtfully, then threw the weight plate at the mirror behind him. The glass exploded in a shower of reflective fragments, the crash echoing through the empty gym like a gunshot. Zane jumped back, pieces of mirror crunching under his feet. "What the hell, man?" "Oops," I said. "Guess I'm not as coordinated as I used to be. Must be all that stress from my complicated marriage." I selected another weight plate. Zane watched me with the focused attention of someone trying to predict the next move in a chess game where the rules kept changing. "You want to know what I think happened?" I asked. "I think you saw a woman who was feeling vulnerable and decided to take advantage. I think you fed her lines about being special, about deserving better, about how her husband didn't appreciate her. Classic predator behavior." "It wasn't like that," Zane protested. "No? Then what was it like?" I threw the second weight plate at a different mirror. More glass, more noise, more evidence that this conversation was happening on my terms rather than his. She came to me, Zane said, backing toward the exit. She made the first move. I tried to keep things professional, but she was persistent. Persistent, I repeated. My wife was persistent in seducing you. Poor Zane, overwhelmed by the advances of a desperate housewife. The third weight plate took out the mirror above the water fountain. Zane flinched at each impact, his confidence eroding with every crash. I'm calling the police, he said, pulling out his phone. Good idea, I said. Tell them you're being threatened by a man whose wife you've been screwing in hotel rooms. I'm sure they'll be very sympathetic. Zane hesitated, thumb hovering over his phone screen. He was smart enough to realize that calling for help would mean explaining why help was needed, and that explanation wouldn't reflect well on him. What do you want? He asked. I want you to understand something, I said, moving closer. My wife convinced herself that I didn't see her, didn't value her, didn't pay attention to her needs. But I see everything, Zane. I've been watching you for weeks. I know where you live, where you work, where you go for coffee every morning. I know about your student loans, your credit card debt, your ambitious plans to open your own gym someday. His face went pale. You can't threaten me. I'm not threatening you, I said. I'm educating you about consequences, about what happens when you insert yourself into other people's lives without permission. I picked up a dumbbell from the rack, 25 pounds, heavy enough to make a point, but light enough to handle easily. You know what the beautiful thing about modern technology is? I continued. Everything is connected. Your car, your apartment, your bank accounts, your social media profiles, all of it linked together in ways that most people never think about. I threw the dumbbell at the sound system. Speakers exploded in a shower of plastic and wire. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise had been. Take your car, for example, I said. Nice vehicle, expensive, probably financed through the credit union downtown. What would happen if they received anonymous reports about illegal substances being transported in that car? I don't use anything, Zane said quickly. Of course not, but proving that would require time, money, legal representation. Very inconvenient for someone with your financial situation. I selected another dumbbell. Zane was pressed against the wall now, as far from me as the room would allow. Or your apartment, I continued. Rental, right? Month-to-month lease? What would happen if your landlord received complaints about noise, parties, suspicious activities? Hard to find new housing with a problematic rental history? The second dumbbell destroyed the television mounted on the far wall. Zane jumped at the impact, his nervous system clearly operating in crisis mode. This is insane, he said. You're insane. Maybe, I agreed. Adultery has that effect on people. Makes them unpredictable. I walked over to the exercise bikes and began methodically destroying the display screens with a third dumbbell. Each impact sent plastic fragments flying across the room. The thing is, Zane, you thought this was a game. Seduce the lonely housewife, have some fun, move on to the next conquest. But games have rules and you didn't bother to learn them. I'll stay away from her, he said quickly. It's over. Done. You'll never see me again. Too late for that, I said. The damage is already done. Now we're in the consequences phase. I finished destroying the exercise equipment and turned back to face him. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by fear and the realization that his actions had created an enemy he wasn't equipped to handle. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to resign from this job, tonight. You're going to tell your boss that you've accepted a position somewhere else, somewhere far away. You're going to pack up your apartment and leave town within the week. I can't just leave, Zane protested. My life is here, my clients, my plans. Your life was here, I corrected. Now it's somewhere else. Geography is very important in situations like this. I pulled out my phone and showed him a photo I'd taken earlier that day. His car, parked outside his apartment building, with what appeared to be a small bag of white powder visible on the dashboard. Photoshop is amazing these days, I said. Very realistic. Of course, the real thing would be even more convincing, especially if someone happened to call in an anonymous tip about suspicious activity. Zane stared at the photo, understanding dawning in his eyes. You're framing me. I'm providing motivation, I said. The frame comes later, if motivation isn't sufficient. I put the phone away and walked toward the exit. 1 week, Zane. 7 days to wrap up your business here and find somewhere else to be. After that, life gets very complicated very quickly. This is illegal, he called after me. Blackmail, vandalism, harassment. Prove it, I said without turning around. But remember that proving things requires evidence, and evidence can be very inconvenient for people with secrets. I left him standing in the wreckage of the weight room, surrounded by broken glass and destroyed equipment. The security cameras had been disabled before I entered the building, and my presence would be impossible to prove. Just another random act of vandalism in a world full of senseless destruction. Outside, the night air felt clean and cold. My hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline working its way out of my system. The confrontation had gone better than expected. Zane was smart enough to understand the implications of what I'd shown him, scared enough to take the threat seriously. My phone buzzed with a text message from Iris. Zane says you threatened him. This has to stop, Rick. We need to talk like civilized adults. I typed back quickly. Civilized adults don't have affairs. They get divorced first. Her response came immediately. I want to work this out. I made a mistake, but our marriage is worth saving. Our marriage ended the first time you took off your clothes for him. Everything since then has just been paperwork. I drove home through empty streets, past houses where other couples were probably having normal conversations about normal problems. Bills, schedules, weekend plans, the mundane negotiations that make up most marriages. I envied them their ordinary concerns. At home, I poured myself a whiskey and sat in my office, reviewing the evening's work. Phase 3 was complete. Zane would be gone within the week, either voluntarily or with assistance from local law enforcement. That left Iris isolated, cut off from her support network, facing the consequences of her choices without the comfort of her young lover. But isolation wasn't enough. She needed to understand the full scope of what she'd destroyed, the complete cost of her decisions. That would require more careful planning, more precise execution. I opened a new document and began typing. Phase 4, Social Destruction. The real work was just beginning. The Riverside Country Club's annual charity auction was the social event of the season, where our town's elite gathered to bid on donated items and pretend their competitive spending was motivated by philanthropy. I'd bought a table for 8, knowing that Iris would feel obligated to attend despite our current circumstances. Image mattered more than comfort in her world. I arrived early and positioned myself strategically. Table 12, near the back, but with clear sightlines to the entrance and the auction stage. Tommy sat to my right, along with 2 other friends who understood they were attending theater rather than charity. The remaining 4 seats stayed empty, a visible reminder of my wife's social isolation. Iris entered at 7:30, 15 minutes after the official start time. Late enough to make an entrance, early enough to avoid seeming desperate for attention. She wore a black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary 2 years ago, probably chosen to send some kind of message about mourning or rebirth. She wasn't alone. Melanie Kramer flanked her left side, playing the role of loyal friend and bodyguard. On her right walked a woman I didn't recognize immediately, then placed as Jennifer Walsh, a divorce attorney from the county seat. Iris was assembling her own support network, preparing for war. The 3 women surveyed the room, looking for an appropriate table. Most were full, occupied by couples and families who'd planned their attendance weeks in advance. The few available seats were scattered among different tables, making it impossible for them to sit together. I stood up and waved. "Iris, over here. I saved you some seats." Every head in the vicinity turned to watch this domestic drama play out in public. Iris's face went through several expressions before settling on forced gratitude. She had no choice but to accept the offer without seeming petty or vindictive. The three women approached our table like diplomats entering enemy territory, and I could almost hear the tension in the air. Iris took the seat directly across from me, while Melanie and Jennifer positioned themselves as human shields on either side, each one acting like a buffer between us. The subtle protection they offered was more for show than substance, but it made the moment feel more theatrical, and I was more than willing to play along. "Rick," Iris said carefully, her voice almost measured, "thank you for saving seats." "Of course," I replied, my smile thin but sincere. "We're still married. Wouldn't want people to think we can't be civil." Jennifer Walsh leaned forward slightly, her posture straight, her eyes focused. "Mr. Hayward, I'm Jennifer Walsh. I represent your wife in the dissolution proceedings." "Dissolution," I repeated, glancing at Iris with a wry smile. "Interesting word choice. Makes it sound medical rather than legal." "Divorce can be handled amicably," she continued, her voice professional, even a little rehearsed, "with proper communication and reasonable expectations on both sides." Tommy snorted quietly from his seat, a sound barely audible but telling. He'd been briefed on the evening's objectives and was clearly enjoying the performance, his eyes glinting with amusement. "I'm very reasonable," I said, emphasizing the words with a little too much care. "Ask anyone here. Rick Hayward, most reasonable man in town. Never raises his voice, never makes scenes, never embarrasses his wife in public." The emphasis on never wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Iris shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the implicit threat. There was no need for more words. The message had already been sent, loud and clear. The auction began with small items: gift certificates, wine collections, weekend getaways donated by local businesses. I bid aggressively on everything, pushing the prices higher than the items were worth, forcing other bidders to pay premium prices for charity donations. It wasn't about the items. It was about making a statement, about controlling the room, about reminding them who I was and what I could do when I set my mind to it. "Lot 15, the auctioneer announced. His voice echoed through the room, drawing everyone's attention. "A romantic weekend for two at the Riverside Hotel, including dinner, spa services, and champagne. Donated by the Riverside Hotel Management." I raised my paddle immediately. $500. The bidding continued around the room, a back and forth that grew more intense by the second. 700, 850, 1,000. I kept raising my paddle, pushing the price higher and higher, ignoring the growing murmurs of confusion and curiosity. They didn't know yet, but they were about to. $1,500, I called out, my voice carrying over the growing buzz in the room. The room fell quiet. $1,500 was excessive for a weekend package worth maybe $600 retail. The whispers started, people started to look at each other, and the air began to feel heavier, charged with anticipation. This was no longer just about charity. It was about something else entirely. "Going once," the auctioneer said, his voice wavering slightly under the pressure. "Going twice." 2,000, called a voice from across the room. I turned to see Dave Garrison, Iris's boss, holding his paddle high. His face was flushed. Whether from alcohol or emotion, I couldn't tell, but I could see it in his eyes. He was staring directly at our table, and I knew this bid had less to do with charity than it did with something far more personal. 2,500, I countered, my voice steady, a quiet challenge. The room buzzed with whispered conversations. The bidding war was no longer about a romantic weekend getaway. It was a spectacle, It was a power play, a competition to see who could outdo the other. Everyone could feel the undercurrents of personal conflict playing out in real time. It was no longer about charity. It was about showing who had control. Dave raised his paddle again. 3,000. I stood up slowly, making sure my voice carried clearly through the room. $5,000 for a romantic weekend at the hotel where my wife conducted her affair. The silence was absolute. 200 people, all holding their breath, waiting for the next move. Iris's face went white, her eyes darting to Jennifer and Melanie for some kind of support. Jennifer was whispering urgently in her ear, no doubt advising immediate retreat. "Rick," Iris said quietly, her voice almost pleading now. "Please don't do this." "Do what?" I asked, my voice innocent, the words dripping with false sincerity. "Support charity? Bid on auction items? Participate in our community's social traditions?" Dave Garrison lowered his paddle, finally understanding that continuing this bidding war would only make the situation worse, expose his own feelings for a married woman, and draw unwanted attention to everything happening between us. "Sold," the auctioneer said weakly, his voice betraying his discomfort. "Lot 15 to paddle number 47 for $5,000. Applause rippled through the room, uncertain and scattered. No one knew whether they'd just witnessed charity or spectacle, and the unease in the room was palpable. I sat back down and smiled at my wife. "Looks like we'll be taking a romantic weekend together, just like old times." Iris stood up abruptly. "I need some air." She walked quickly toward the exit, Melanie and Jennifer following close behind. I gave them a 5-minute head start, then excused myself and went looking for them. I found them in the parking lot, standing beside Jennifer's car, deep in an intense conversation. I approached slowly, making no effort to conceal my presence. "Completely unhinged," Jennifer was saying, her voice sharp with frustration. "This kind of behavior will work in our favor during settlement negotiations." "He's trying to humiliate me," Iris replied, her voice raw. "Make me look like a fool in front of everyone we know." "He's succeeding," Melanie added, her voice cold, calculating. "You need to fight back. Show people you won't be intimidated." I stepped into their circle, my voice cutting through the tension. "Ladies, enjoying the evening air?" Jennifer positioned herself between me and Iris, a subtle but unmistakable warning. "Mr. Hayward, I'd advise you to avoid contact with my client outside the presence of legal counsel." "We're at a charity auction," I said, my tone casual but firm. "Public event. I'm allowed to speak to my own wife." "Estranged wife," Jennifer corrected, her voice sharp. "Still legally married," I countered, "still sharing assets, debts, and social obligations." I pulled out my phone and showed them a photo. Iris and Zane at the Riverside Hotel, the same hotel I'd just won at auction. The image was time-stamped from 3 weeks ago. Iris's face went pale as she looked at the photo, her mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. Melanie and Jennifer exchanged looks, but neither spoke. It was too late for explanations now. The truth was already in the open. "Thought you might want to see what $5,000 bought me," I said. "Turns out the hotel keeps very detailed records of their guests. Security footage, registration logs, room service orders. Amazing what you can discover when you know where to look." Iris stared at the photo, her face cycling through emotions like a slot machine. "Where did you get that?" "Does it matter? The important thing is that it exists, along with dozens of others just like it." Jennifer stepped forward. "If you obtained those images illegally, public hotel, public parking lot, no expectation of privacy. I checked with a lawyer. That was a lie, but it sounded convincing. The truth was that I'd hacked the hotel's security system using the same techniques I'd used on the fitness center. But proving that would require technical expertise that Jennifer Walsh almost certainly didn't possess. "What do you want?" Iris asked quietly. "I want you to understand something," I said. "For months, you've been telling people that I don't see you, don't appreciate you, don't pay attention to what you need. But I see everything, Iris. Every lie, every deception, every moment you thought you were being clever." I showed them another photo. This one showed Iris and Melanie at lunch, heads together in conspiratorial conversation. The timestamp was from last week. "I know that Melanie encouraged your affair from the beginning. I know that she told you I was probably cheating too, that you deserved to find happiness wherever you could. I have recordings of those conversations." Melanie's face went pale. "You recorded us?" "I recorded everything," I said. "Months of evidence. Your marriage counseling sessions where you practiced your victim narrative, your shopping trips where you bought lingerie for hotel visits, your phone calls to Zane when you thought I was working late." I put the phone away and looked directly at Iris. "You wanted to be seen? Congratulations. You're the most visible woman in town." I walked back toward the country club, leaving them standing in the parking lot with the wreckage of their damage control strategy. Behind me, I could hear urgent, whispered conversations, probably about lawyers and restraining orders and damage limitation. But it was too late for damage limitation. The evening had accomplished exactly what I'd intended. Everyone at the auction would remember the bidding war, the public revelation, the obvious tension between estranged spouses. The story would spread through our social circle like wildfire, growing more dramatic with each retelling. Inside, the auction was winding down. Tommy met me at the bar, grinning like someone who'd just watched his favorite team win the championship. "That was beautiful," he said. "Absolutely beautiful. Did you see Dave Garrison's face when you mentioned the affair?" "Hard to miss," I said. "Think he'll bid on anything else tonight?" "I think he'll be drinking heavily and reconsidering his life choices." We ordered drinks and watched the final lots sell for reasonable prices. My aggressive bidding had disrupted the evening's rhythm, made everyone nervous about getting into bidding wars they couldn't afford. "What's next?" Tommy asked. "Phase 5, I said. "The finale." "Which is?" I smiled and finished my whiskey. "You'll see." Outside, Iris's car was gone. She'd retreated to plan her next move, probably with Jennifer Walsh providing legal advice and Melanie offering emotional support. But they were playing defense now, reacting to my moves instead of making their own. The end game was approaching, and I held all the pieces that mattered. The lakeside cabin sat 20 miles outside town, hidden among pine trees that had witnessed decades of secrets. Iris had rented it for what she called a personal retreat weekend, a chance to think about our marriage and figure out what she wanted from life. The rental agreement was still in our joint email account, the reservation still active for another month. I'd been planning this final confrontation for weeks, waiting for the right moment when all the pieces would align. Tonight was that moment. Iris was isolated, her support network fractured, her lover driven out of town by fear and self-preservation. She had nowhere left to run. I arrived at the cabin first, using the spare key she didn't know I'd copied. The place looked exactly as I remembered from the security footage. Rustic furniture, stone fireplace, large windows overlooking the dark water. Romantic, in the way that rental properties try to be romantic. Generic charm designed to facilitate other people's fantasies. I set up my equipment methodically, hidden cameras in 3 locations, audio recording devices disguised as everyday objects, a laptop connected to the cabin's Wi-Fi network. Everything would be documented, preserved for posterity and legal proceedings. My phone buzzed with the text message I'd been expecting. "I'm here. Are you inside?" "Come in," I typed back. "We need to finish this." Iris entered cautiously, like someone walking into a trap they couldn't avoid. She wore jeans and a sweater, casual clothes that made her look younger and more vulnerable than the polished image she usually projected. Her face was drawn, exhausted by weeks of stress and social humiliation. "Rick," she said quietly, "thank you for agreeing to meet." Our marriage started in a place like this, I said. Seems appropriate to end it here too. She flinched at the word end, but didn't argue. We both knew that reconciliation was impossible now. Too much damage had been done, too many bridges burned. I know you're angry, she began. You have every right to be. What I did was wrong, inexcusable, but destroying my life won't fix our marriage. Our marriage can't be fixed, I said. It died the first time you took off your clothes for him. Everything since then has just been funeral arrangements. She sat down in the chair across from me, the same chair where she'd sat with Zane 3 months ago. I wondered if she remembered, if the irony was intentional or accidental. I was lost, she said, feeling invisible, unappreciated. I know that doesn't excuse what I did, but maybe it explains it. You felt invisible, I repeated. So you decided to become very visible to someone else. It wasn't supposed to happen. Zane was just my trainer, someone to help me get back in shape. But he listened to me, made me feel valued. Valued, I said. Is that what we're calling it? I pulled out my phone and played a recording. Iris's voice filled the cabin, captured during one of her hotel visits with Zane. God, I needed this. I needed to feel wanted again, to remember what it's like when someone actually sees me. Her face went white as she recognized her own words. You recorded us? I recorded everything, I said. Every lie, every betrayal, every moment you thought you were being clever. I played another clip. This one was Zane's voice, recorded during their lakeside weekend. Your husband's an idiot if he doesn't see what he has. You're incredible, Iris. Beautiful, smart, passionate. He doesn't deserve you. Stop, Iris whispered. Please stop. But I wasn't finished. I had hours of recordings, weeks of documented deception. I played clips of her conversations with Melanie, planning alibis and constructing cover stories. Her phone calls to the hotel, making reservations under false names. Her discussions with Zane about my work schedule, my travel plans, the best times to meet without being discovered. You want to know what invisible looks like? I asked. This is invisible. Your husband, sitting in his office, listening to his wife plan her affair with methodical precision, watching you lie to his face every single day. Tears were running down her cheeks now, but I felt no sympathy. Sympathy required trust, and trust was something she'd forfeited months ago. I'm sorry, she said. I'm so sorry, Rick. I know I hurt you, but we can work through this. People survive infidelity. Marriages can be rebuilt. Can they? I asked. Can you rebuild something after you've proven it was worthless to begin with? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark lake. You know what the worst part was? Not the affair itself, but the way you made me complicit in it. Every time you came home and told me about your training sessions, your late nights at the office, your weekend retreats, you made me an accessory to my own humiliation. I never meant for it to go so far, she said. It started as just attention, someone who made me feel special. But it got complicated. Complicated, I repeated. Another interesting word choice. Like this was something that happened to you, rather than something you chose. I turned back to face her. Tell me about the first time. Rick, please. Tell me. I want to understand how someone decides to destroy their marriage. What was the moment when you chose him over me? She was crying harder now, but I waited. I had all the time in the world. It was after the company party, she finally said. You were working late again and I felt so alone. Zane offered to drive me home and we started talking in the car. He said things you hadn't said in years. What things? That I was beautiful. That any man would be lucky to have me. That I deserved better than being taken for granted. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. I nodded slowly. So you decided to prove him right by proving me wrong. It wasn't like that. Wasn't it? You turned our marriage into a competition between me and him. Every time you were with him, you were choosing him over me. Every lie you told me was a vote of no confidence in our relationship. I sat back down, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. You know what I realized, Iris? You didn't have an affair because you felt invisible. You had an affair because you wanted to feel superior. You wanted to believe you were special enough to deserve two men fighting over you. That's not true, isn't it? You could have asked for marriage counseling. You could have told me you were unhappy, that you needed more attention, more romance, more emotional connection. But you didn't do any of those things. You went straight to betrayal. I pulled out a folder and set it on the table between us. Divorce papers, already filled out. All you have to do is sign. She stared at the papers like they might burst into flames. What about counseling? What about trying to work things out? What would we work out? How to trust someone who's proven they're untrustworthy. How to love someone who's demonstrated that love isn't enough. People make mistakes, Rick. People can change. Some mistakes are too big to survive, I said. Some changes come too late to matter. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Tommy, right on schedule. Excuse me, I said, answering. How's it going? Package delivered, Tommy said. Should be arriving any minute now. Perfect timing, I said, and hung up. Iris looked confused. Package? Headlights swept across the cabin windows as a car pulled into the driveway. Iris turned to look, her face going pale as she recognized the vehicle. Dave Garrison climbed out of his sedan, looking like a man on a mission he didn't fully understand. I'd sent him a carefully crafted message earlier that evening, suggesting that Iris wanted to see him, that she needed emotional support during a difficult conversation with her estranged husband. You called Dave? Iris asked. I thought he should hear this conversation, I said, since he's been so concerned about your welfare. Dave knocked on the door, then entered without waiting for permission. He looked around the cabin, taking in the intimate setting, the obvious tension between Iris and me. Iris, he said, are you all right? Your message sounded urgent. I didn't send you a message, she said quietly. Dave's face went through several expressions as he processed this information. Confusion, realization, anger. He turned to look at me. You sent it. I thought you deserved to hear the truth, I said, about the woman you've been pining after for the past 2 years. I played another recording. This one was Iris talking to Melanie about Dave's obvious infatuation. He's pathetic, really, following me around like a lost puppy. I feel sorry for him, but I could never be interested in someone so desperate. Dave's face crumpled like paper in a fire. You said that about me? Dave, I can explain, Iris began. No need, I said. The recording explains everything. I played more clips. Iris laughing about Dave's romantic gestures. Iris telling Zane about the flowers Dave brought her, the dinner invitations she politely declined, the obvious crush she found amusing rather than flattering. You made fun of me, Dave said quietly. All those times I tried to help you, tried to be there for you, and you were laughing at me behind my back. It wasn't like that, Iris protested. What was it like? Dave asked. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds exactly like that. I stood up and walked to the door. I'll leave you two to discuss this privately. Dave, the divorce papers are on the table if you want to take a look. Iris, you know where to find me when you're ready to sign them. Outside, the night air felt clean and cold. I could hear raised voices from inside the cabin, Dave's hurt and anger finally finding expression, Iris trying desperately to manage damage that was already beyond control. My phone rang. Tommy again. How did it go? He asked. Better than expected, I said. Dave's getting the education he never knew he needed. And Iris? Learning that actions have consequences. It's a difficult lesson at her age. I drove home through empty streets, past houses where other couples were probably sleeping peacefully in beds they shared without deception. The thought didn't make me envious anymore. Envy required hope, and hope was something I'd abandoned weeks ago. At home, I poured myself a whiskey and sat in my office, reviewing the evening's recordings. Everything had been captured in perfect detail. Iris's confession, Dave's humiliation, the final collapse of the narrative she'd been constructing for months. Tomorrow, she would sign the divorce papers. She had no choice now. Her support network was destroyed, her reputation in ruins, her lover fled to another state. Fighting would only prolong the humiliation. I opened my laptop and began typing. Final report. Mission accomplished. The marriage was over. The reckoning was complete. Iris would spend the rest of her life remembering the cost of her choices, and I would spend mine building something better from the wreckage she'd left behind. Justice, it turned out, tasted exactly like whiskey and felt exactly like silence. The story ended here, in this moment of absolute victory, with no epilogue to soften the edges or suggest redemption. Some endings were meant to be final.